A more likely kind of choice to make is the one between a router and a switch, because you can choose to connect a bunch of machines in one LAN and have them managed by a switch, or you can choose to connect those machines through a router and have different routing rules and so on. So why would you do one or the other? The drawback of a router is that you have to configure it, and switches, as we've seen, have this nice property that they just figure out the routing for you. But switches can do this because they're intended to be used very locally, where it is quite reasonable to have an entry for every machine that you might want to reach through that switch. Whereas a router uses prefix-based forwarding tables typically to take advantage of more hierarchy and be able to scale to larger systems. A router also works with any kind of topology, so you can have a loop in your routing graph, and the routing tables should be able to deal with that just fine by sending packets in a good direction and not keeping them in a circle. If the configuration goes wrong at the router level and you do send packets in a circle, at least there's the time to live field in the packet, which will make it expire eventually. Switches have to be in a tree topology. You can't connect them in a circle, otherwise they will infer and just send frames around in a loop. So that limits the way that you connect switches together. So the overall picture for sending a message from one host to another can look something like this. On that starting host, you're at the application level and you put it into TCP or UDP, wrap that into a IP packet, send it over some link, which is going to go over some wire or electromagnetic spectrum, something like that. That physically communicated thing may arrive at a switch, say, which has a link in it, which decides which next level to go. Maybe that next level is actually a router, which is more complicated than the link. It knows more about network routing and can do some fancier things, and so on. Eventually you get to the host and you go all the way back through these layers. So these different layers of the network allow us to make different choices in sort of scale and complexity and hardware use and simplification by having simple switches where they work, more complicated routers where they work, and full-blown hosts where we need to do more complicated things still, especially user-facing applications. And of course, there can be any number of switches and routers and mixtures between this host and another host.